Pareidolia, the tendency of the human mind to see patterns in chaos. I thought that was a nice one. Do you see Jesus or Gandalf? Alright, so here I am. I missed a week, but I think I'm back on track now. So welcome to Strange Times, number 6, is it? No. What number is it? I've forgotten. Number 5. Anyway, let's continue. Mysterious activity on Mica Mountain. A series of strange phenomena was reported by a woman who wishes to remain anonymous from Mica Mountain in Idaho, in the United States. She describes her experiences. Quote, I lived up there for 8 years in a cabin with no running water. I had a very modern job, but my life was very simple away from work. I loved it out there, she said. The first incident she recounted involved a phantom bonfire seen from her property in the fall of 2007. Quote, I had a bit of a commute, and by the time I got home, it was starting to get dark, she explained. I had a loop that I liked to ride through the woods that had some nice jumps, and then I'd come up over a hill and I could look at my home and also down at this cabin. So I was up at the top of the hill and I saw a fire burning down there. It was a big fire, not an out-of-control fire, but a bonfire. And I heard chanting, she said. Quote, it wasn't people sitting around the fire talking. It really did sound like Native American chanting. But still, I told myself, it's the people who live there. I sat there for a while and I listened, and then I headed home. I was like a quarter mile from my home at this point. It was maybe a day or two later when I had a chance. I rode over there in daylight, and there was no fire pit. There was no burned ground. There was nothing, she said. The witness never got the chance to ask them about it because she didn't know them very well and rarely saw them. The next incident she related was a sighting of strange lights over nearby Mica Mountain in the winter of 2009. She was approximately an eighth of a mile away from her previous sighting. Quote, we lived in a kind of snowy area. We'd get 4 feet of snow. In fact, sometimes I'd have to shovel my windows, we had so much snow. A snowy night can just be incredibly beautiful when there are stars out. And I was about to get ready to go to bed, but I didn't quite want to go to bed yet. So I went out, and I had just fed the horses, and I leaned my arms over the horses' back. They're warm and fuzzy, and just a nice thing to stand next to in the cold. And I looked up at the mountain, she said. I looked at the top of the mountain, and I saw these lights. I tried to tell myself, well, maybe somebody's driving around up there. Except these lights, they were above the mountain. They were not touching the mountain. There were, 7 or 8 of them, quite a few, and they were just balls of white light. That's what it looked like from where I was. I watched them and I thought, how would I describe what I'm seeing? They looked like they were playing. They would leapfrog over the top of each other. They would shoot off at just incredible speeds, and then they would just stop, just like in an instant. And she continues, as if that wasn't enough, I thought, I've got to figure out what these are. I just have to know. I jumped in my truck in my pajamas and a coat and headed for the mountain. The mountain was snowed in at that point, but I got as close to it on county roads as I could. But the weird thing was, as soon as I went out of my driveway, I couldn't see them anymore, even though I still had a clear view of the mountain. And I headed east and then north towards the mountain and took the county road and headed back west and just made a loop and came back. As soon as I drove back down my driveway, I could see them again. I thought, this is too weird. I watched them for a little while, and then it kind of weirded me out that they disappeared when I got off my property. So I went to bed. The lights, she said, were many times bigger than a star, relative to the mountain, and this may not be very accurate, but my guess is that they were like the size of a tree on the mountain. So, 20 feet. They were big. The sighting was impactful enough that she was certain it must have made the news, but the next day nobody else seemed to have seen it. Quote, I really, sincerely thought it would be on the news, and there was nothing. Probably I was the only one who saw it, or could see it, she said. The final sighting from the property that she shared was of an unknown hairy hominid. This sighting took place in the summer of 2010. Quote, I was out on my property in the daylight during summertime, and I saw something crossing the pasture just to the east of us. I thought, that's a calf moose. That's a young moose. Because it was so awkward looking, and it was about the size of a yearling moose, she said. I wonder if you guys heard my stomach growl then. It made this weird noise. I got lunch upstairs waiting for me. Anyway, let's continue. But she quickly realized that what she was looking at was no moose. It was walking on two legs and was definitely not a moose, she said. It was much larger in both height and weight than a human and moved in a slightly hunched over way. Other than that, it had a dark coat, and I can't say much about the length of the coat because it was too far away. There was both an awkwardness and a power about it, and as soon as I saw it, it looked right at me, she said. It was like a quarter of a mile away, and I wasn't making any noise. It was too fast. It just noticed me too fast. It felt psychic. Once again, I became kind of obsessed, and I chased after it. I'm not a fast runner, but I ran as hard as I could. It went through a small bunch of cows in a small pasture that's not used much, and then it just wasn't there. I thought, it must have moved very quickly and very silently, because it didn't disturb the cows. How did it get away so quick? Before that moment, I would have said, Bigfoot is probably not true. But then I read about it, and the thing that most resonated with me was Bigfoot as an interdimensional being. Because of the way it was so quickly aware of me, and how, almost magically, it had seemed to disappear. She goes on, I loved it out there, and weird things happened, but I never felt unsafe, she said. But they certainly changed my world view. I'm just going to go and eat. I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Don't know why I feel the need to tell you all of these things about eating food and that sort of stuff. I'll try and refrain from telling you when I'm going to go to the toilet. So this next one is interesting because it's an old one, and I hadn't heard it, but I'd say you guys in America probably have. It's called Momo. It's this monster called Momo, which I reckon is a pretty cool name, from Mississippi River from where is it? From Louisiana in Missouri. And so I decided to include it because it's got some similarities to the last story that I just read out. And it's also got some similarities to a story I did a couple of weeks ago about the Australian Yowie from Wooden Bong with the nuts. Anyway, I'll push on now. I'm just yabbering. Momo. During the summer of 1972, in the small Mississippi River town of Louisiana, Missouri. On the afternoon of Tuesday, July 11th, 1972, Terry and Wally Harrison, 8 and 5 years old respectively, were playing in their backyard with the family dog while their parents were at work. Their older sister Doris, 15, had been left at home to watch them. Quote, Terry and Wally Paul, he's 5 years old, were out in the back with Chubby, the dog, when I heard Terry start screaming, Doris told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Quote, I looked out the bathroom window and saw it. I started crying and ran into the other room to call Mum on the telephone, and then she and Dad came home. End quote. Terry and Doris were both said to have gotten a good look at the creature, which was covered in hair from head to toe and speckled with blood from a dead dog it was carrying under one arm. And that's the bit that's similar to the Yowie account, when Wollongong in New South Wales in Australia, there was a witness who saw a Yowie crushing her dog up against its chest, and the dog later died. So apparently these things don't like dogs. I'll continue. Quote, It was right by the tree, Doris said. 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me. End quote. Chubby the dog reportedly grew very ill after the sighting. His eyes became bloodshot and he began vomiting violently. He finally recovered after a meal of bread and milk. Food would cure Chubby the dog. Anyway, I'm in a stupid mood as usual. Edgar Harrison, 41, the children's father and a city employee with 21 years of service, heard a strange growling sound outside their home several days later, on Friday, July 14th. Harrison, a deacon in the Pentecostal church, along with maybe 50 other persons, were attending a church meeting held at their house. Around 8:30 p.m., the meeting began to break up. As Harrison and a dozen or so members of his congregation lingered, talking, they sighted 2 fireballs soaring from over Marzoff Hill and descending into the trees behind an abandoned school across the street. The objects appeared at 5-minute intervals. The first was white and the second green. About 9:15 p.m., Harrison heard ringing noises, such as might be caused by the throwing of stones onto the metal water reservoir, which stands at the top of the hill. The reservoir, which holds 1.5 million gallons of water, is in an area where neighbourhood children often play. After one especially loud ring, Harrison reported, I heard something that sounded like a loud growl. It got louder and louder and kept coming closer. At that time, my family came running from the house, and they began urging me to drive off. I wanted to wait and see what it was that was making this noise, but my family insisted that I drive away. And so I drove down Allen Street, across the town branch. I stopped the car, and my wife and family told the congregation, I have trouble with that word. They said, Here it comes. And those 40 people turned and ran down the street. Close quote. Police officers Jerry Floyd and John Whitaker went to the Harrison home. They searched the residence but found nothing. This article continues on. There's not much more about the beast. They talk about how the town formed a posse to try and hunt it down, but there's no extra details about the cryptid, so I'm just going to leave it there. But I thought it was interesting that these guys also saw lights in the sky and over a hill as well, and then soon after they saw this creature, just like the previous story. Although in the previous story it was months apart. She saw lights and then, like a year later, she saw the beast. Okay. Truck driver encounters a Yowie. A 53-year-old delivery driver claimed to have had a terrifying encounter with Australia's Bigfoot, known colloquially as the Yowie. In November of 2018, according to the Gold Coast Bulletin. The driver, identified only as Gary, said that he encountered the Yowie while driving in a remote area of the Gold Coast's hinterland, which is kind of hilly bushland. I don't live too far from the Gold Coast. It's a couple of hours away. The Gold Coast is a coastal city in the southeast corner of Queensland, Australia. Queensland has long been a hotbed of Yowie sightings, with 76 sightings recorded by Australian Yowie Research dating back to 1932, and 4 sightings reported to the organisation in 2018 alone. Gary said that he was forced to slam on his brakes when the hairy hominid suddenly appeared from out of the bush. The truck driver said the beast stood well over 6 feet tall, had brown eyes, and was covered in fur. He said it struck the hood of his truck before disappearing back into the dense forest. Quote, underneath the hair you could see pecs and abs and all sorts of stuff. I was shocked, he said. And this is a sketch he did. An unusual case of missing time. I'd like to relate a personal experience that I had when I was an adolescent, in the hope that others might be willing to come forward and share any similar experiences that they may have had. The time of year was late winter or early spring, around March or April, I believe, of 1978. I was in junior high school, 7th grade, and 13 years of age. It was a weekday at about 3 p.m, and school had just let out. I left the junior high school, which is located next to a hospital in my hometown of Ridgewood in New Jersey. Ridgewood is located about 20 miles from New York City, in Bergen County, a very populated area of the state. I walked, as I did most days, home from the junior high school. My parents' home was located about 1.5 miles from the school, along a very direct route. Most of the walk was on the street on which the school was located, followed by a left and a quick right towards the very end of the walk. So I'd normally just walk out the front door of the school and take a left. That was the route that I would normally take. However, I had a run-in with a group of boys that bullied me on a regular basis, so that rather than taking a left out the front door of the school and proceeding due south for that 1.5 miles, I'd go left, then take another left at the very first traffic light after leaving the school. Then I'd walk to the next street over and take a right onto that street, again walking due south. It wasn't much of a departure from my normal route, as the street ran parallel to the one I'd usually take to get home. I'd been doing that for at least a couple of months, in an effort to avoid walking past the homes of the boys who were bullying me. Therefore, I'm confident of the fact that there was no way I would have become lost or confused of my whereabouts. That was confusing. Okay, continue. However, one day as I began walking home, I noticed that everything seemed strangely quiet, almost muted. The normal noise and bustle associated with the after-school rush of children walking home from school was oddly absent, and the quiet was rather eerie. There were still cars and some pedestrians present as I walked down this busy suburban street, but there was an odd, unreal feeling to everything, along with this disturbing, muted silence. The street that I was walking down was called North Pleasant Avenue, and the intersection that I was approaching was at the corner of North Pleasant and Ridgewood Avenue. After crossing Ridgewood Avenue, North Pleasant turned to South Pleasant Avenue, and I would pass the elementary school that I'd attended the years prior to entering the junior high in September of '77. At crossing that intersection and approaching the elementary school, I was approximately 0.8 miles from my home. I mention these facts only to continue to emphasize that this was a route and a neighborhood in which I was used to traveling. As I continued south from North Pleasant toward South Pleasant and toward the intersection of Pleasant and Ridgewood Avenues, I saw the traffic light, the same familiar stores at the corner, and the small parking lot in front of the stores. However, these landmarks appeared to be getting further away as I walked closer to them. And still this odd silence persisted. As I continued to walk toward the intersection, these landmarks continued to appear to recede further into the distance as I approached them. I began feeling very disoriented and anxious, and then nothing. A complete loss of memory. I simply do not remember anything past the point of approaching this intersection and seeing it recede further into the distance as I walked ever nearer to it. My next memory was of awakening, for a lack of a better description, on another street in a different part of town, a fair distance from where I had started from the junior high school. I remember feeling very shaken and confused and somewhat frightened. What had happened? And how did I end up in this different area, nowhere near where I'd begun walking, and nowhere near where I'd blacked out? This is where things get a bit stranger still. Within a couple of minutes of coming to, my mother pulled up in her car, parking along the curb of the street where I was walking. I opened the door, and she looked at me with great concern and said, "John, are you all right?" Now, normally my mother did not come looking for me if I was a bit late arriving home from school. Remember, this was the late '70s, and parents were decidedly more relaxed about the comings and goings of their children. My mother never picked me up from school unless the weather was very severe or we had some kind of appointment after school. And as long as I was home by dinner, my parents didn't worry or wonder about my whereabouts. If I didn't come straight home, it was assumed that I was at a friend's house or had some kind of after-school activity. The fact that my mother knew exactly where to find me was surprising, and I asked her how she knew where I was. She replied that she was home doing chores around the house when a voice in her head said, "Get John, he needs you." She of course asked me what had happened, and I told her about the receding intersection and the strange silence, the memory loss, and of waking up to find myself walking in this other part of town. I had no idea what had happened, and to this day I still do not, other than a vague memory or feeling of having been told something or shown something significant. Who told or showed me what, and where it happened, I cannot recall, although I feel at some point that I will recall the entire incident. I simply feel that this event was significant for a reason that I can't explain, but its meaning will eventually be made clear to me. I thought that was a pretty cool story there, apart from all the confusing, over-detailed description of the route that he took, but I understand why he did that, because he wanted us to know that he was very clear about where he was until this incident happened. Okay, that's me done now for Strange Times number 5, not 6. 6 is next week. I hope you guys enjoyed the stories, and I'll see you next week. Catch ya.